Welcome. Pleased to see everyone here today. My name is Lizzie High, and I will be your moderator for today's panel conversation focused on CMMC and the phenomenon known as a false start. So to set the ground for our conversation today, we do have a Q&A feature here within our chat. So if you look up to the top of your screen over to the left, you should be able to see that Q&A function. We welcome your questions. Please post those along the way, and we will have time at the conclusion to go through some Q&A, and we hope to be able to get to everybody's questions as we work through this. We have a great panel lined up for you today, and I would like to kind of turn it over to our panel to do some quick introductions. As I indicated, my name is Lizzie High. I oversee the commercial team here at Alluvionic, and we are a cyber accreditation body registered practitioner organization. We have been part of that organization since 2020, supporting companies in readiness for CMMC. I am joined by one of my colleagues, Bobby Padilla. Bobby, would you provide an introduction?
Yes, hi, thank you, Lizzie. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bobby Padilla. I serve as the Information Security Director at Alluvionic. And I also oversee our company's own internal CMMC compliance program. We were CMMC Level 2 certified in March of 2025. But more importantly for today's session, I also lead our CMMC services practice, where our team has supported over 180 clients in their CMMC readiness efforts. I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Bobby. We are joined by a couple of our partners in the C3PAO space. Cole, would you do an introduction?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining, and happy to be here and given the opportunity to share. I am Director of Cybersecurity Services at Kratos, and obviously CMMC is a big part of what we do. We also do some other compliance frameworks as well, but where I sit is in the CMMC space and managing our team of assessors and also advisors, because we do provide advisory services to customers getting ready for CMMC. But our primary practice, if you will, is CMMC assessments. We are also uniquely a member of the DIB. Kratos is a broader organization, so we've done a lot of work with our own internal IT function, getting them ready for CMMC, and we were also certified last summer as an organization beyond just our C3PAO capability. So again, great to be here. Look forward to sharing.
Thank you, Cole. And then we're also joined by Steve.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Steve Gilmer here. My journey with what we now call CMMC started actually when this was a draft DFARS in 2013. I was CISO at Sikorsky. We were the sole test case. I was involved in crafting language around the original DFARS, had the DoD actually rewrite it for me, which is an honor, I guess, dubious maybe. But have been engaged since then. Sat in a SCIF with NIST, helped develop 171 when it was just a draft, version 1, and have been part of the community as it's evolved. Cohn-Resnick itself is a C3PAO and an RPO. We were also engaged as an organization before the rollout of CMMC. We went to the DoD, were part of the discussions there. Had input before it was open to the public to help shape what it looks like, and have continued to help customers both prepare as well as achieve their certification. Happy to be here and answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a lot of great knowledge on this panel. We're excited to share that with all of you today. And I heard in there, we got a couple that have actually been through the certification ourselves. I know Alluvionic went through the certification last year ourselves as well. And Cole, your team, and Steve, I know you've been through many certifications. So definitely we've been through this ourselves. So happy to share that as part of our discussion as we move forward today. To set the stage, we really want to start with putting some context around where we are in the CMMC process. Steve, you dropped a good nugget there that this has been going on for a really long time. You talked back way back to 2013. We felt it was really relevant to start with just right now, where we currently are with this phased rollout for CMMC Level 2. This is what has spurred a lot of action in the DIB, and we want to take just a couple minutes to take a look at that. So November of 2025, we saw a big thing happen. So right here at the top of the screen, you'll see 252.204-7021. That is the new DFARS clause that enables the government to enforce CMMC, to put it into contracts. And we are currently in what is known as phase 1 of this new rollout period. So Bobby, when we're looking at phase 1, one of the things that kind of stands out is this is listed as more of a self-attestation, but it's for level 1, level 2, and there is this expectation of 100% compliance. Can you talk to how that's different from the DFARS of the past, where you did go into the supplier performance risk system and you did upload a score? What are they asking for now?
Yeah, so with phase 1, as you indicated, that we're currently, in that phase now that kicked off in November of 2025. So the requirements are that you are that you have implemented the entire control set, right, for the NIST 800-171 revision 2, and then self-attested. So in essence, the requirement at this point is not necessarily by the Department of War, is not to be certified by November 10th of 2026 by a third-party assessor. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that timeline maybe being accelerated, but not necessarily by the Department of War, right? So they're very clear, as indicated in the slide. So you must comply with the requirements for CMMC level 1 or level 2, and then self-attest. So in the supplier performance risk system, as most of our clients and contractors are familiar with, you've historically have just entered your SPRS score, right? So on the scale of -203 to a 110, you've always kind of just entered that score. Well, in the SPRS now, there's an additional tab for CMMC compliance, and that's where you must attest to your compliance and your certification. Currently, self-attesting only. And that must be performed by a senior affirmation official in your organization. So it's not just your IT manager or something like that that should be doing that. That should be coming. That attestation should be affirmed at the highest levels in your organization.
Awesome, thank you. So right now we are in phase 1, kind of the law of the land. If you've got a direct contract with the government and you have this clause, should be the self-attestation. But when we're talking self-attestation, we are expecting, hey, I'm compliant, I've got it all in place, and that's what I'm going to go into the SPRS system and indicate. Now, when we transition into this November, we're going to see a little bit of a change there. Then we're seeing an authorization for the third-party certification requirements. So Cole or Steve, could you share what the expectation is as we come into November of 2026, what we think the contracts are going to start to say there?
Sure. The expectation's simple. The execution's difficult, if that makes sense. The expectation is that November 2026, organizations will be required to be certified by a C3PAO. But as it says on the slide, it won't hit 100% of all organizations on that day or that month, or it'll roll out over time. And that's the critical part, because from a business perspective, you do not have a guarantee that it will hit you in November or the following October or whatever it is. Your most likely avenues are new contracts you're going after, renewal contracts you're going after, but it could also come, randomly, not truly random, but through change orders, etc. So you as an organization need to be prepared to be certified. You should be in place. If you look at, again, November 2025, you've been self-attesting. We're there. We meet all 110 controls, 320 objectives. You should be ready to be certified and have that third party come in and be able to pass. So that's the point here. And what makes it difficult is people are trying to figure out timing, and no one knows the exact time they will have to meet this requirement. I just know it will be required after this date.
Great context there. Cole, anything to add there? Or as we look ahead, so November 27 and November of 28, we see that we're going to continue to see that rollout of the requirement for third-party certification moving forward.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and Steve, you kind of hinted at it, I think, is that no one really knows what the timing is, right? We have an idea, November 26th is when, contract award, you're going to start seeing it as a requirement for contract award, but then moving on to 27 with level 3, and then, contract option years, all of that kind of stuff, right? You're going to start seeing it in more and more scenarios. So the sooner you move on this, the sooner you're ready for this, and the sooner you achieve it, the better off you'll be, because you wouldn't want to be in a scenario where you anticipate it's going to be, March of 27, and then it happens to be, December of 26, and now that's a very problematic situation to be in if you were targeting a date that all of a sudden moves up quite a bit.
Yes,
Yeah,
very,
absolutely.
very good. And this is all.
Lizzie, sorry, Lizzie, if I may, and it's outside of what you have on the slide here. The other piece to look at, we're here focused on CMMC and the DIB clearly, but many of us have contracts outside of that. And if you look at like GSA contracts that are requiring NIST 800, 171, release 3, whereas we're talking about release 2 here. If you look at our competition and sometimes partners to the north, meaning Canada, they already meet release 3. So the market and other demands are actually beginning to exceed this. So it really ties back to Cole's point about you wouldn't want to catch off guard, not be prepared. There are other demands that are also pushing for this.
And just to add to that too, the sooner you can get to the level 2 compliance, like Steve's hinting, saying there, then when level 3 or when revision 3 becomes, the standard for CMMC, which it already is in other areas, then the better off you'll be, because you'll already have you'll say, hey, my level 2 is done, and then you can start working, or sorry, my level 2 at Rev 2 is done. Now I can move on to start preparing for Rev 3, because that's going to be the next thing.
It's a 2-year-old standard, guys. It's not a new standard.
Yes, yes. Now, this timeline is really predicated upon what the federal government is going to push out into contracts. But if you are also a subcontractor, you may have more advanced timelines levied upon you as well. So one of the things we also wanted to touch on is what that might look like in reality as a subcontractor versus a prime contractor. So the prime contractor is receiving that clause in their contracts, but in advance of that, they're already reaching out to their supply chain and they're trying to mitigate risk. So here on this slide, we're actually sharing a real letter that one of our customers gave to us. They received on April 6th of this, just earlier this month, from a prime contractor that's requiring their subcontractors to be C3PAO certified, level 2 certified by a C3PAO by the end of July. So this is a much more accelerated timeline than we looked at with the phased rollout that we see from the government side of things. What are you seeing here with your customers as organizations are reaching out to you as C3PAOs and saying, hey, we got to get certified fast? Are you hearing similar messages from your customer base? Cole, what do you see?
Yeah, we haven't encountered this directly yet, but we have worked with some organizations that are concerned that, in their position as a subcontractor to a prime, that they could end up in this particular situation. But we haven't encountered it firsthand, but I have certainly, this isn't the first time I've heard this. And we tell people all the time that this is really, don't, if you're a subcontractor, especially, don't wait on what the government's going to do, because really, your subcontractor can essentially fast track this requirement.
Yeah,
And
Lizzie, we've seen this. I've seen this exact letter, but others very similar from multiple clients. We've seen variations on it, even to get the RFP to bid. We've seen requirements that say you have to have a Spurs score, you have to be at least at an 88. We need to see the proof that it's in the system, etc. All variations of the same thing. The prime requiring, that if you're going to participate with them on contracts, that you need to move up your schedule versus what the government has said. Speaking from experience, I mentioned I was with Sikorsky when the original DFARS came out. We had 20,000 subs. We did massive awareness campaigns. I'd get on a call like this and we'd have over 1,000 subs on, just trying to tell them that a cyber DFARS existed, because this had never existed before. And it was a big deal. And to help them understand what it meant. And, the goal really was to have them get on board quickly, to continue to work with them. But there is an implied, I don't want to call it a threat, but a reality that if you don't, then we will not be able to work with you. And that was not the preference or the intent of those comments, but that's how this is really meant. They need to know that you're there to do the work that they need you to do, and vice versa. We want the work from them as subs. So it does speed up the clock for quite a few folks a lot.
yeah, absolutely. And Bobby, I know that you are on the receiving end of this with a lot of the companies that you're supporting, and that the broader team is supporting. And I agree, Steve. I've seen many variations of these types of requests coming out. This one was exceptionally aggressive with that April issuance and July full certification requests coming through. Anything to add, Bobby, with regard to what you're hearing from clients about the limitations they're putting, maybe even limiting certain information that they're willing to share until a client reaches a certain level of compliance?
Yeah, I think much of what Steve and Cole have already indicated, like especially Q1 for us, we got a lot of interest, right, after the new year with this, with organizations that had perhaps not been pursuing CMMC level 2 compliance as aggressively, and now they're receiving these memos or this messaging. In some cases, you need to start working on this. In other cases, with mandates well before the government's November 10th, right, deadline. So certainly it got a lot of people's attention, and many of our customers their goals are to be certified well before November 10th based on their prime contractors stipulations.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So let's talk about the numbers. So when we think about CMMC, who does this impact, and the capacity of the ecosystem? What's that really look like? So the expectation is that about 80,000 defense contractors are going to have a CMMC level 2 requirement. The cyber accreditation body has published some details about the current state. So as of March 2026, 1,074 companies have achieved CMMC level 2 certification. They're official, they're real. We've seen 39 conditional certificates, and we can talk about that a little bit. So there is only about 1% certified right now. The line is really, really long, and we're seeing some aggressive timelines being promoted out there among prime contractors, and we see the rollout time frame. So let's talk a little bit about that. What should companies be thinking about when we look at some of these numbers right now?
So Lizzie, couple things. One, I think 80,000 is low. I think that's a correct DoD expectation in terms of DoD requirements and the way they've written, the DFARS. But it ignores what we just talked about on the previous slide with the primes and their expectations. And, you know, there's a lot of work that the primes would do to make sure that the subs, from a cyber perspective, meet the requirements. By saying, go get your CMMC level 2, they can stop that work. And in fact, it's easier probably on the subs at the end of the day. I used to have a team of 20 that did nothing but, you know, contact the subs every day. Let's go over your cyber. So we get to eliminate that. So yes, 80 is the official number, 80,000, but the real number is much higher. So I think that's the first thing. Yeah, as of I actually have stats that are very similar to yours. They're from the Cyber AD also. As of Friday, you know, there's 103 C3PAOs. That's a 5% change since February. We had 5 new ones come on board. There are 552 who have actually applied to be a C3PAO, but they need to go through their process. They need to get their own house in order. DIPCAC has to assess them. DIPCAC only has so much bandwidth also. So there's a lot there. As C3PAOs, we've all been assessed ourselves. I don't know if everybody's been through it twice. I know Cone Reznyk's been through it twice at this point. You know, so some of us have been doing this for a while. If you look at, you know, the fact that there's 103 C3PAOs, that doesn't mean that the 103 certifications can happen in any given week. Because if you look at the CAP or the CMMC accreditation plan that we all have to follow, Cyber AV DoD governance rules, it says that you will have a lead CCA, a second CCA, and a QA CCA on every engagement. So if you're a one person, 100% virtual organization, you will still have 3 CCAs at a minimum on your engagement. Obviously, something that small would not need more. But if you're a larger multinational, you may need more folks. There are currently 759 CCAs. That's it. Leads, there's only 484 right now. So again, you start to look at that and realize we're down greatly in the number that could happen every week. So there's a real challenge here to get through all this, to get organizations done and to meet what everybody should be meeting.
Yeah, I think
those are pretty stark numbers, Cole.
Yeah, sure. So just to add, I guess maybe to the starkness of this. So I think there's another component of CMMC kind of at now that rulemaking is done. You know, like Steve mentioned, you know, we as C3PAOs, we've all been through a DIPCAC assessment. And to this point, that's resulted in us being authorized as a C3PAO. Well, as the Cyber AB matures and becomes that accrediting body, right? Now all of us C3PAOs have to go through the accreditation process, which is, you know, more rigorous, more costly. And you think a lot of these C3PAOs are, you know, smaller organizations, or they're C3PAOs who are leveraging, you know, subcontractor assessors. So this cost is going to be a pretty significant burden to a lot of C3PAOs, I think. So that's going to put, I think there's good potential that could put downward pressure on the number of C3PAOs. We may actually see that number kind of flatline or maybe even dip over the next year or so as accreditation, you know, becomes an issue for some of these C3PAOs. And I think, you know, just the way in which this sort of the market was constructed with, you know, C3PAOs kind of being these organizations that can confer the certificates, but then we have kind of assessors, you know, who are kind of out for hire, I think is how kind of the ecosystem is working, at least currently. At least that's what we're seeing a lot of. I think makes it challenge is another part of this that kind of makes it hard to predict, right? Are we going to be able to meet this demand, which it seems like is going to be pretty difficult. But even I think the nature of how it's constructed is going to make it hard for us to even determine that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's all super important facts to lay the groundwork for our discussion today. So these numbers are looking at who's really certified. We see the conditional certifications out there. Those are individuals that had a POAM, so they met the minimum criteria of no 5-pointers, no 3-pointers, only 1-pointers. So there's only certain controls that can be POAM'd, and they have this 6-month timeline to address whatever issues were identified. What this doesn't really take into account is organizations that got sent away. So that's really what our discussion today is. What is that trigger point, and what are organizations doing wrong when they approach their C3PAO assessment? They think they're ready and they're actually not quite ready. So we want to dig into that, because with this backlog, with the long lines they're going to be facing, we want to see companies as ready as they possibly can be when they get into that line, so they don't get shipped back and end up at the back of the line. One of the areas I want to start, you both mentioned, Cole and Steve, the NIST 800-171 revision 3. So this is out there, published, effective. It's been there for a couple years, but CMMC exclusively points to revision 2. So an older standard that is out there. And I know that there is confusion about that. And it's easy to understand why, because you search it online and you're going to find revision 3. Bobby, I know last week you're talking to people all the time. And last week, this came up twice with you, with some of the customers that you talked to. So what are you seeing and hearing about revision 3 versus revision 2, and how can we help companies understand where they need to be right now?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So I mean, I think if you're working with a partner in the ecosystem, you're probably going to be aligned, right, with revision 2, which is the standard. But not everyone has that luxury. So we're seeing some organizations that are trying to do the compliance themselves naturally, and when they just go out to NIST.gov, right, you're going to say, I want to find out what this 800-171 is about, and I want to see what I can implement myself. And naturally, it's going to tell you that the revision 2 has been superseded. It's kind of even hard to find a little bit. Revision 3 is right there for you as the newest standard by NIST, right? But that's kind of outside of CMMC. All the rulemaking, the CFR, everything has been written to the revision 2, right? So just kind of understanding, having that understanding that, as Steve mentioned earlier, it's very clearly aligned that current CMMC program for level 2 compliance certification is aligned with revision 2, not revision 3. So just ensuring that you don't, again, there's nothing wrong with having revision 3 controls in your organization, right? From a security perspective, for future proof perspective, but you will be certified you will be assessed on revision 2, and therefore, if you're implementing revision 3, there's most likely going to be some misalignment with the controls because they don't match up exactly the same. So your system security plan is going to be off naturally. Again, it doesn't mean that you're not instilling good security in your organization, but that certainly would, I think, be something that a C3PA would identify as a false start if the SSP, even if it was greatly written, it would be misaligned with the revision 2 requirements.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Bobby. I would add to it, just from a easy to get confused if you don't have a partner who's helping to guide you. Every one of us on this call has talked about NIST 800-171, yet the actual assessment guide we use now, as of November of last year, is the CMMC assessment guide from the DoD. Still aligns NIST 800-171, but there's subtle differences. So that's a key call out. If you are new to all this, you don't realize it. Likely you do not realize NIST had NIST 800-171, and then they have NIST 800-171A, the assessment guide. That's where all the objectives are. So there's another mistake that we've seen with organizations. Oh, we met all 110 controls. They didn't know the 320 objectives existed. So they tried to meet the controls, and maybe they did, but they don't meet the objectives unless they fail. Pardon me. So that's a challenge. We often see organizations that have tried to do it on their own. They don't have the rigor that's really required to meet this. The end of the day, meeting CMMC is about situational awareness and operational awareness. You are explicitly allowing what's happening in your environment in regards to CUI. That, for most organizations, is turning it upside down. In the past, they've by default allowed things to happen, like a network connection. We have a flat network, and people can get on it, they do what they want. CMMC is the opposite. You deny all, approve by exception. So it turns your IT, your infrastructure, your business processes on their head to say, we have to explicitly authorize all these things first. And organizations that haven't done that. And it becomes very clear when you get their initial documentation, in this case, the SSP. You begin to look at that and you know quickly that they're not ready.
Very, very good. So Cole, when we're talking false starts, what is the first thing that you're looking at when you're talking to a client that is trying to engage in this C3PAO assessment process that triggers to you that they're not quite ready? What do you see first?
Yeah, so what we typically see first is either one of those, right? So it could be the SSP. Sometimes we see that first, but really the thing we hone in on first is the scope of the environment that they want to have assessed. And so, sometimes we'll talk to folks and they're not even sure what the scope that they're seeking to assess is. So we know, that's obviously problematic. And in that case, are you working with somebody, to help figure that out, to help define that, or to help you pick a direction, right? Because you could, if you want to take your entire organization through this process, you certainly can. But you can also take, an enclave approach and carve out or build a specific environment to handle CUI. So the scope is what we're looking at, and kind of what Steve was talking about as far as like the assessment guide. So DoD has also put out, DoD and the Cyber AV have also put out a scoping guide that pretty clearly defines, what assets or how assets should be categorized within a CMMC scope. So we can't conduct an assessment if we don't have a well-defined scope that adheres to the CMMC scoping guide. So that's, I think issue number one. I mean, you can have a great SSP, but if I don't know exactly what it is, and you've described, how you implement all these things, but I don't know what it is I'm evaluating what you've written against, then it's going to be pretty difficult for us to conduct an assessment.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Steve, do you see that similarly in your experience, scope being kind of stop number one?
Absolutely. I mean, that scope, that boundary, that's your foundation to everything you're going to do. That's the heart of the certification, what's included. And if an organization doesn't understand it, that is a huge red flag to stop right there. Same conversations that Cole's talking about, where a client comes in, maybe they've been scheduled, some of them over a year ago, right? We want to be on the calendar for June of this year. And as we're approaching that, how you doing? Where are you ready to go? And you start to have conversations, and a lot of them will clearly admit we're not ready. And now you're scrambling to move them, keep them in the queue. But what do you need? 2 months, 3 months? How long to get ready? And that calendar towards, as we get closer to November, for every C3PAO I've talked to, including our own, is very, very full. A lot of organizations trying to get in, before that next drop of the November date.
Bobby, what are you seeing from customers that maybe went to face a C3PAO and got guidance from that that assessor that they weren't quite ready? What are some of the common issues that they have experienced?
Well, so certainly as weak SSPs and scoping as well. Like they indicated as part of the two most critical things when you go for certification. Also, sometimes we've seen unclear or just poor shared responsibility assumptions. So just kind of, I purchased this tool, so I'm compliant, right? You know, that kind of thing. Thinking that that's going to take care of a lot of things because of perhaps what they purchased based on that marketing, as well as evidence, just kind of alignment of evidence to the controls and to the objectives, as Steve indicated earlier. We sometimes see just the evidence doesn't match up. And then ultimately just operational reality versus what's documented. That's one of the biggest things that we see too, just again, misalignment there. Perhaps a well-written implementation statement, but it's not really reflective of the environment. You know, once we start talking to the people and start, you know, really looking at the evidence and then looking at the environment.
Bobby, I like what you said there. You know, for anyone who is still on this journey, don't buy marketing that, you know, buy my solution, my tool, whatever it is, and this is all you need. There is always way more work to do around it. It's important. There's really good tools out there. I'm not knocking tools in any way. Understand what they really do. Understand that shared responsibility matrix. Understand your responsibilities around it. CMMC in a box, if you will. There's good toolkits that, you know, various companies have put together that will say, here's a set of policies you can use as a foundation to make them your own. Here's a set of, you know, things to get you started, but you need to inherit them into your own culture, into your own operations. You need to operationalize those into what you do to be successful. At the end of the day, if you can't explicitly show that you authorize everything, you deny by default, that you understand the situational and operational awareness, you're not ready to be certified. And that's important. There is no easy button. That being said, this is a 2013 standard. It's not necessarily a hard button that we're talking about. And I could actually and have made the argument that in some ways, because we're on a 2013 standard, even though it's Rev 2, Rev 2 is just typos and clarifications of Rev 1. It makes it harder. We're in a cloud-centric environment that did not exist when this was written. You know, we talk about things like VoIP, which they still exist, but it's not prevalent like it was a decade ago. So it's a different world. So there's some challenges there, right? And we're there because of, I guess, politely saying, the bureaucratic process we had to go through to get CMMC in place. It makes, if anything, it makes it harder than doing R3, but as you know, the others pointed out earlier, there's a delta. If you meet R3, you will not meet R2. You have to do all the controls in R2 plus the delta to R3 if you need to meet both.
Can we talk a little bit about the involvement of the broader organization? So there's been a long-standing myth that this is an IT issue, that you'll delegate this down to the IT department, they're going to handle it for you. In your experience in the assessment process, what parts of an organization are typically engaged and participating as you go through interviews and describing how these controls are being implemented across the broader organization? Cole, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think it really depends on the organization and the scope. So it truly is primarily, you know, for most organizations, I think an IT function, or at least it kind of lives out of the IT function. But certainly, you know, when you get into broader, larger organizations, you know, organizations within the organization like HR, business operations, areas like that are definitely going to have to be a part of, your CMMC scope, CMMC assessment, right? One of the families, personnel security, for instance, that's background checks, how are you, onboarding folks? How are you offboarding folks? What do you do when someone's terminated? And I think even that's a good example of coordination, right? Because HR is going to handle a lot of that process side of those particular requirements. But when it gets into, termination, right? We have to remove somebody's access to the environment. Well, that's probably going to be an IT function, but it's going to take coordination between your HR function and your IT function. So that's one example of kind of the coordination that goes beyond IT. But I think certainly, it really is organizationally dependent. For smaller organizations that have, a smaller group of people supporting the environment, it's probably going to be largely an IT, a rest within the IT realm. But as organizations get larger, environments get more complex, you have different users of CUI, which are important. And especially when it comes to access, marking, distribution, all that kind of stuff, that does come into scope for an assessment as well. So it really depends on the environment, but there definitely is coordination across the organization beyond just IT.
Yeah, Lizzie, I'll add as well, just from a readiness perspective, certainly heavy on the IT for sure. The physical protection, right? The physical security of your facilities. Sometimes that is the IT person or staff in a small company, and as Cole indicated, in a larger company, it's certainly going to be a facilities officer or something like that, facilities security officer. One area when we scope CUI with our clients is we always want to talk to the operational folks, right? So the IT folks will be like, well, yeah, CUI is stored here and there. And then sometimes we talk to the operational folks, the folks who are working in manufacturing. They're like, actually, we do this as well, right? We print it, we do this. And then IT person was uninformed, right? So then that's why it's critical to talk to the handlers of the CUI, because that's going to ultimately help define your scope. And then we work with the IT team or to determine how are we going to, implement the security controls. So I think operational community is super critical, as well as the facilities, the physical security folks.
I think that's an important distinction, Bobby. So Lizzie, if we reframe your question a little bit, from an assessment perspective, it's easy to feel like it's IT primarily, because when we look at NIST 800-171 and what the controls are, for the most part, they affect the way systems and environments are set up. But if we look at trying to get it ready, as Bobby was talking about, that's where you look at the fact that it is a culture change, that it affects your business processes. And those are outside of IT. They set up systems to mirror your business processes. They don't define them. I've got a global Fortune 25 company that made massive business process changes to put everything into an enclave. If not, they had a global manufacturing community that was all in scope. And it would have been an incredible leap to get to where they wanted to be. For them, it wasn't worth it, but that was not an IT decision. That was 100% a business decision. And so having those conversations and driving it is very important. And I agree with Cole, depending on the size of your company, it's a little bit different. Where you're a smaller company, everybody's kind of hands-on, wears 3 different hats, those kind of things, it blends together. But at the end of the day, CMMC, and I go back to when it was a draft DFARS, the intent sitting in the SCIF was to change the way the business operates, to culturally, fundamentally protect CUI in what we do in everything day to day. So I personally have always approached it as a culture first, technology IT second. But when you ask about the assessment, which was your question, a lot of the questions answers will come from the IT teams.
And just to add on to that, just real quick, I 100% agree. And if you look at the 800-171 controls and test objectives, right? They are geared towards process. What do you do, and can you prove that you do it? It's yeah, you get into technical configurations and IT things like that, but to Steve's point, yeah, it's looking at your processes and whether you follow those processes as you've defined them.
Yeah, those are all really good points, and the reframing of the assessment and who's involved in the actual assessment versus the actual implementation and establishing this control set within your environment. That there's a little nuance to how all of that is executed across the board. So all really, really good context there. So thank you so much for that. I do want to be sure that we're allocating a little bit of time for our audience to ask some questions, but we can continue our conversation as that progresses as well. We do have just a couple that are in here right now. So one is really, I think, just about the process for certification. So do you have to recertify every year if you're certified? But what does that really look like? So can we talk just about the administration of this certification process? If you get certified in June of this year, what happened? What is in store for you next year?
So, Lizzie, looking at the question in the comments, I'm making some inference here. So I just want to be clear on that. Because if we talk certified, you've met all 110 controls and 320 objectives. Yet the second part of the question says, if you're certified but the score is terrible, does that matter? And so I agree with Cole's question, is this in the context of self-attestation? And then the answer to that is it depends. Depends on who's asking and why they're asking and what it means. So I have a client right now. They're just starting their CMMC journey. And like many organizations just starting, they're at a negative 203. They don't meet any of the controls, and they're in the middle of changing out their MSP and a lot of work going on to get there. They've been asked by a branch of the Navy for their score. And the Navy has said, right now, today, we don't care what your score is. We care that you've reported. So a negative 203 reporting and saying truthfully that's where you are is what they are looking for, and that's okay. There are other cases where primes or certain contracts, are saying, no, we want a score of 88, or we want to see that you've done X or Y. So that question of, does that score matter, depends on context. So that's important. If you're truly certified, if you've passed your C3PAO assessment and you've been awarded a CMMC level 2, right? You've gotten that, then your score will be 110. And then every year for years 2 and 3, you have to go in and self-attest. Yes, we still meet it. It's an affirmation. It's a legal statement that, and I'm not a lawyer, but it's legally you're obligating as the individual in your company. We do still meet it. If something was to happen, you have a breach, and they look and say, well, if those controls have been in place and we don't think that breach would have happened, you may find yourself on the end of a false claims, right? So there's responsibility to making sure this is still in place, the controls are still working the way they should. Some organizations are choosing to bring in their RPOs or their C3PAOs. It can't be their C3PAOs, excuse me, but their RPOs to say, hey, independently assess us and tell us where we are. So they have an independent assessment to say, yes, the controls are still in place. Again, they're looking ahead to say, we're doing the right things. That's not a CMMC requirement. So I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking you have to do that. And then after your third year, you have to have the C3PAO come back and be independently assessed again. And that cycle starts again. The years in between, you will go in and affirm that you're still doing it. And after 3 years, you'll have the C3PAO come back. If you have any significant changes, say you go from Microsoft Dynamics to SAP for your ERP, or some other major change. You make a major acquisition, sell off half of your business, whatever it is that affects your scope that you were certified on, then you need to be recertified at that point. You can't wait until the 3 years. So lots of variations to look at and consider in that question.
Yeah, thank you so much for unpacking that a little bit more, because there was a little bit of nuance in the way the question was asked. Another question that we have is really related to organizations that are perhaps holding off on going through the investment of having that third-party certification, and they're sort of waiting for a customer to actually require it of them. We talked about this at the very beginning. You just sort of never know when that's going to come down the line from your prime contractor, if you're a subcontractor, especially, because that they could put a pretty short timeline on you. What kind of ramifications are there? So if all of a sudden you get that letter that we showed earlier, and the prime contractor is expecting you to be certified by July, and you call all the C3PAOs in your Rolodex and find out they can't get you in by July, what are the ramifications there? Cole, can you share any insights?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the ramifications could be severe, at least in that case, right? Because, it could put contracts in jeopardy, things like that. I think it's really risky, especially if, and I guess it depends on how much work has gone into preparing, for an eventual CMMC assessment. If it's an organization that's done a lot of work, sort of on their own, so to speak, and they have, folks internally that understand the framework, what's required, all of that, then I suppose, doing a quick turn assessment, if it's possible, could turn out favorably. But I think if it's really just been kind of business as usual, and there hasn't been any engagement with any third parties, always, I think it's always a good idea to engage with a third party, at least in some form or fashion. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody coming in and doing everything for you, but just somebody to help you with interpretation, to help answer questions, to help with some of those nuanced things that we've kind of hinted at and touched on. But if that hasn't been done at all, then I think that's a pretty risky situation. If you're looking at, having to do an assessment in 3 months. I know there are C3PAOs that have availability, but I know others that are booked out, through the rest of the year. So I think there's a lot of variation out there, which can complicate a search, right? If you're looking for somebody, it may increase the number of folks you got to talk to, which pushes your timeline even more potentially.
Yeah, very, very good. I have another question that came into the chat, and this one is about history of compliance with the processes. So, and we've heard this question a lot in talking to clients. So, hey, we're implementing these new control requirements, new technology, et cetera. As you go into the assessment, is there a rule of thumb that you as an assessor are looking for some sort of longevity and proof and validation that these controls are in place and that they are functional within an organization? Some historical track record.
So, absolutely. And it's not about just starting out, right? It's for those who are certified now also. They have to have evidence, and evidence is based on your processes. And when we think about length of time, if you're just starting out in something and you're only going to review something annually, it's going to take you a year to get to that point to have evidence, right? So, thinking about that ahead of time, if you're understanding the controls that are in NIST 800-171-R2 and how your processes are going to work, if you can start putting that evidence into place, if you can start, I'd honestly say, writing your policies and your procedures to align, even if you're not 100% enforcing it, but changing your culture, changing the way you operationalize things, getting people to think and act that way because it's normal. It's the way you do business. All that will help you. But you need to think about evidence. One of the things that throws a lot of organizations is when you look at release 2, it basically says, hey, you need to do these things, and then doesn't say how frequently. We guide organizations, take a look at release 3. They went back to using the term ODP, or organizationally defined parameters. The DoD has published a list of what they consider acceptable ODPs that they will accept. And let's face it, that's who we're trying to make happy, is the DoD. So if you want to know how frequently you should scan for vulnerabilities, how quickly you should patch, go look at that release of ODPs and incorporate those. It also gives you something that's strong to lean on with an assessment. Where did you come up with this? We used the DoD guidelines. Oh, great. Those are good. I can accept those without challenge, right? So all that's really important. So all those sort of things, building it out, making it habit, will help someone who is starting out. When your business processes are new, you have a chance to design them right to meet everything. It's much harder to change them later. That's what makes it so hard for so many companies.
That's a great point. I do want to be sure that we make some time just to leave everybody with your contact information. So Cole, I know we have a quick overview of Kratos. Anything you'd like to share about your organization, or sort of just closing thoughts on the CMMC challenge that all of these organizations are facing?
Sure. So thanks again for the opportunity to share. I definitely appreciate that, and enjoyed sharing thoughts and our experiences and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is kind of a kind of an overview of Kratos as a broader organization. I kind of touched on it in the intro, but we are an RPO. We are also a C3PAO. Our RPO work really complements what we do as a C3PAO. And what I mean by that is, we're what we do from getting folks ready is to get them ready for an assessment, right? So there's kind of two types of consulting, I would say. It's, hey, build this for me and set it up. And then there's those who make this ready for an assessment. Those are two different things that do, overlap, obviously. But that's kind of where we sit in this space. And again, thank you for the opportunity, and feel free to reach out. I'm sure I don't know, Liz, if you're going to be sending out contact information and things like that, but feel free to reach out. Would love to chat about where you're at in your CMMC journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve as well, share a little about your org, anything you want to leave anyone with for the context of today.
Yeah, I echo Cole's comments. Appreciate, being here, being able to talk with everybody today. So thank you. We are also C3PO and an RPO. We have enough full-time staff that we can run 4 different engagements in any given week. We've been invested in this since 2018, when CMMC was just coming off the ground. On top of that, we are cybersecurity, technology risk, and privacy practice, meaning that we focus across all cyber, all tech risk, and privacy. So if you need to meet other frameworks, if you're trying to figure out how to do your IT audit, if you need help with your VCSO, those sort of things. I like Cole's comment there about 2 different types of organizations helping people get ready. We're not an MSP, meaning we're not going to host your services. We're not going to, run your SOC for you, but we do help you prepare for that readiness, learn how to operationalize it, change your culture, move it forward. So again, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to anyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bobby. I'm skipping you and me because I do want to just leave this. We do have a bonus if you're participating. If you are have a PMI certification, PMP or otherwise, you do get professional development unit for participating today. So this also is available to you to get your PDUs. And so with that, we will close out. Alluvionic, we're an RPO. We're here to help, and we're happy to have had the opportunity to bring this session to you. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bobby, for participating, and for all of you for tuning in. And we will circulate this back out to all attendees. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.